Welcome back, everyone, to Figuring Out the Formula. I'm your host, Kyle. I'm here with Pat and Chandler, as always. Boys, we had a great weekend. It was the Brazilian Grand Prix in Sao Paulo, and it was really good racing. It was also a sprint race weekend, so whether you like them or you don't like them, stay tuned. We'll talk about that later, but it was a action-packed weekend. We had wet weather, dry weather. Either way, there were a lot of beers drinking. So let's keep that going. Raise them up, boys. Cheers to the F1 Grand Prix. This was a sprint race weekend, like I said. We are going to skip to the practice and, dip into the qualifying session here a little bit. The weather during it was crazy. Chandler, what was the biggest surprise that happened during this qualifying session?
I mean, Mother Nature making a presence is really just kind of shocking, and it just in a snap of your fingers. And I don't know how common this is in Brazil in the southern hemisphere, but it turned from like day racing to night racing to me. You see the line of clouds coming over, almost looked like a night race. It really did. Like, I know a couple of drivers. I think it was Fernando actually made a comment, was like, "Oh, is this a night race now?" But it just made its presence. It's one of those where somebody said it best. It would have been perfect weather because it did rain a little bit towards the end. But it would have been perfect rain for the race, but it just screws up qualifying.
Yeah.
So of course, obviously can't really control Mother Nature, but that was the most surprising thing of just how at the beginning it was overcast, sure, but like it was like, all right, it's just another overcast day, and it looked like a hurricane was rolling in to Interlagos. That's
Yeah.
just how wild it got in a matter of 10 minutes.
Yeah. Pat, we touched on this last episode a little bit, but last year, you know, this crazy weather phenomenon that happens randomly down there in Brazil, it led to Kevin Magnussen getting on pole position for a Grand Prix. Like it was insane to watch. And then this year we're like, oh crap, is this going to happen again? Well, unfortunately for us, it kind of did. You saw cars that normally run towards the front not really get their chance to stick in where they normally do. So they kind of fell towards the end of the field. But there was a lot more things that were falling, not just the drivers, the roof. Pat, when we say we love racing and normally it like brings the roof down, that's just a figure of speech. Well, can you explain the more literal version that we saw this weekend?
Yeah. So I didn't quite hear about it until, a little bit later in the weekend, but apparently the winds had gotten so strong that at one of the grandstands where they basically just put up temporary shade. I don't think it's really meant to handle like heavy rain. It basically just got totally ripped off. Like some damn Legos or something, which, it kind of brings attention to kind of something I've noticed a lot through, a lot of F1 and, like soccer and things like that, where, we've got all these historic tracks and things like that, like Interlagos, it's a pretty iconic place. But despite all the money that comes in, they don't ever really update the facilities. And so, you have great, nice places like Silverstone and stuff that have permanent grandstands with shade. But then when you get temporary stuff like this put up, it can really cause issues for fans and cause safety issues, and definitely shows kind of the age and wear of the track, which, hopefully the organizers can get on top of. But yeah, I mean, it basically just got folded like a tin can from the heavy rain that came in. I don't know. Did you guys hear if there were any like fans hurt from it or anything like that? Because I don't think I saw any reports of that, luckily.
Yeah, from what I saw, there weren't any injuries, but like you said, like it is. So the stands look like they're permanent stands, but the roof on top of them are not. So they had like little fence posts going all the way up, and then running across the length of the stands. Well, someone put a fucking roofing tarp on top of it, and then Chandler said that these hurricane force winds basically came in, and it had metal clanking everywhere, falling down. I don't know how anyone didn't get hurt, but yeah, Chandler, it looked bad. It looked
Yeah.
really bad.
It did.
We've seen like the issue with the grandstands, right? Well, it wasn't the first issue that we've had this season that's made like international headlines, right? Like in Coda at the US Grand Prix a couple weeks ago, you had the helicopter, which I know is probably my favorite part of the like actual coverage of the sport, like the news coverage and the videography that comes from that helicopter is insane. Well, whichever intern was in charge of pressing the button for the fucking fireworks waited till the helicopter was right over them. Boop, hit the button, and I mean, it looked like a scene from Tropic Thunder. Like this fucking guy is like hauling ass out of there, weaving around these. It's like, so not only do you have like tracks not investing the money to build permanent structures, so you don't have that risk of the wind or weather, whatever, but you also have like carelessness happening.
Well, yeah, it wasn't the only issue that we've seen either this year. Obviously, we saw the more recent helicopter at Coda, which I didn't actually see until this week. Didn't hear much about it until some video surfaced. But earlier this year, something that everybody saw, if you were watching the coverage, was in Azerbaijan. They had one lap left, and the media, credentialed media, were coming out onto like into the pit lane, setting up Parc Ferme, and an Alpine comes into pit and almost runs through a crowd of media journalists. And so we've kind of seen that. It's another close call where we talk about, F1, the pinnacle of sports safety. I want to be safe doing it. And yes, the utmost importance on the driver's safety and anybody there. But look at all the near misses that we've had. Let's see, if OSHA was auditing F1.
Yeah. See ya.
Not pretty. Not pretty.
No.
Let's say that.
Nope. It's sad because how many close calls are you going to have before something actually happens, right? And I don't want to put that into the world. Like I'm knocking on wood right now. I don't want to put that in the world, but that's not on me jinxing them in a podcast. That's on the FIA and Formula One saying like, okay, we're getting careless. We need to hire Kyle Jones, a CPI, he's continuous process improvement certified, to hire him, and we'll fix up our act here. So if you're listening, to do that. The interesting thing though, Chandler, we talked a little bit about, some upgrades that Interlagos could do. Well, give us some news, some breaking news that we heard today. This is the Monday after the race. So,
yep. So we found this out today. Thank goodness. And it's kind of odd timing because when the F1 does this, they usually do it about the Thursday before the race. Is kind of some good positive news. We didn't see that this week, so I kind of got a little nervous. But F1 announced today that they will be returning to Sao Paulo until 2030. So we've got at least 7 more races. So far, I have high confidence that it will be on the track on the calendar longer than that, which is good. It's great. Again, I've talked about it on here before. It's my in terms of racecraft, it's my favorite race circuit. That being said, there's an opportunity. All right, the corruption that happens in Brazil, allegedly. Don't ask the American owner that owns one of the Brazilian Serie A teams. He went on a rant the other day. Go look it up.
Okay.
But I'm sure there's corruption. But as organizers of this race, you've got it for 7 more years. Make some upgrades. We don't need another roof flying off. You've got the investment. Obviously, I haven't seen the attendance numbers, but I'm sure they're fine. I'm sure they're good. It's a good impact for the track and the area of Sao Paulo. Make some upgrades to it. But again,
even they don't have to be beautiful, beautiful upgrades. Like even if you look at the grandstands at Coda, right? Like it's just a tunnel of fucking metal. Like there's nothing crazy architecture, there's nothing going on. It's just a roof and some stands. That's all you need. There's no risk of that shit blowing off and landing on a fucking kid and his dad while they're enjoying their first F1 race. So fix your shit. You got the money. You're signed for 7 more years. If you do make those upgrades, you're probably going to get an even bigger extension next time. So make that investment. that speaking of like investments and timelines and stuff like that, I do want to point out that there was in the news this week a Mercedes employee who has been there forever. I mean, he's been there for 23 years. Mike Elliott. He was I guess at one point, the technical director of Mercedes and made a mistake on some calls with the car this year, got kind of demoted to chief technical officer. And now he's announced that he's retiring or leaving, or either way, he's leaving the team after this season or whatever. Pat, this guy, he was responsible for probably one of the worst cars that we saw in Formula One this season, and that's Mercedes. So it was pretty shitty. Can you explain a little bit about like who this guy is, what he did, and why he's leaving now?
Yeah. So from what I was reading, this guy basically had control with Toto over kind of just literally the overall design concept for the Mercedes car, which, as we all know, for like 8-9 years, it was crazy good. And then since the regulation changes, it's been crazy bad comparatively. They went with that zero side pod design that everybody was gonna fly on a rocket ship, and that totally failed.
That's the one that George on Drive to Survive was like looking at it during the preview and was like,
yeah,
this looks scary.
Like, this looks fast.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. And it totally failed, to put it lightly, bar George happening to win a race in it last year, which fluke, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And then this year, they've tried to kind of just go with the flow of everybody else, but it's still just not been working how they planned it out to be. They've gotten podiums, but at Mercedes, after how dominant they were, that's their expectation now. And I think he's been in the game forever, doing all number of jobs. So who knows if he's just kind of tired and wants to just go home, or
I'm tired. I think I'm gonna go home.
Yeah,
now.
or if he's just gonna go to like another F1 team or something. Because F1's a vigorous sport to work in. So I guess we'll see if he ends up at like another team or some other administrative role or something. But he was really like in the background running the show at Mercedes with Toto.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting to see him leave, but what's the saying? Like, I hate to see him leave, but love to watch him go.
Yeah. So my question, and Patrick, you may have looked at his bio. Obviously, 23 years is longer than Mercedes has been around in the sport. Did he work for the Braun team and the BMW team that is now the Mercedes team? So he was a part of that team. Okay. Or I didn't know if he had like worked with Mercedes Motorsports before they took the jump into F1.
You don't get to be in that position, in whether that's CTO or TD, whatever. You're not in those positions unless you know someone very rich or you've been at a team forever, even before that team maybe existed as a team.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the same thing like with what's his name, Mattia Binotto. He started out at Ferrari like 20 or something years ago as just like a mechanic, and then moved his way up to the team principal. So
yeah, it's very interesting, but I think that 23 years, like we said, you earn some rest, bro. Go take it easy. Go watch NASCAR instead. You'll have a lot more fun.
Sidebar, because I don't know where we'll be able to circle back to it, but coming up in, I think, a week, Keanu Reeves's Disney Plus documentary over the Braun team is coming out, I think, in a week and a half. So Mike gets a feature from this guy. I don't know if y'all had heard about that, but he did Keanu Reeves directed and produced a documentary about the Braun season where they won the championship. I think it was 2009. So that maybe we see this guy in there. I'd give it a watch, some little light watching.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of light watching, Chandler, the sprint race. So I mentioned that it was a sprint weekend. You had the sprint shootout, which is, again, useless as fuck. It's just for the sprint race.
If you listen to us, you know that we don't even entertain the sprint shootout.
No, it's fucking as useful as a shit-flavored lollipop. The sprint race was also like we'll get your thoughts. I'll get your thoughts on if you do or do not like sprint races in a minute. But I just want to point out that I was stoked for the sprint race. Brazil, like last year, was one of the best sprint races we had. So I'm stoked for this year. And okay, that's great. Lando Norris started on pole, like, okay. And then the sprint race, nothing happened. Literally, it was like watching paint dry. It was so boring. Luckily, it's only a sprint, not the real race. So maybe there was hope for Sunday. I'm going to go ahead and start out by saying that I fucking hate sprint races. At first, someone who's not used to actual Formula One, like watching the whole race, the sprint race is great for people who have very little attention span. If you can't stay up and watch the whole race or stay focused, then I understand the point of them. But my God, it's useless, especially with this format this year where you have qualifying for the Grand Prix. Then you have a sprint shootout, which is qualifying for the sprint. But wherever you finish in the sprint doesn't affect where you start for the Grand Prix because you already had qualifying. Like this is the dumbest format ever. If they go back to the original where it was you qualify for the sprint race, where you finish for the sprint race is where you start the Grand Prix. That was perfect. I liked that sprint race, but I didn't like how they're doing it this year. Chandler, we'll go ahead and start with you. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Is a sprint race your thing this year?
This year in this format, no. Like you said, last year's format was good. The only other suggestion I had, if we're going to say that qualifying on Friday locks in on Sunday, I would love to see, and I think F3 does this, where they do a sprint race. Since they don't race at all the locations, they do a feature race, and then the next day they do a sprint race where you, in this for F1, it would work. You take the qualifying. All right, 1 through 10, reverse the grids. 10, like the 10th place starts for a sprint race. It has no, if you're not going to make it an effect. And then same thing with 10, like if you qualify 20th, you start at 10th and then have a reverse grid, basically not all the way like where Max starts in 20th. Like that's lining up the front runner cars then are not incentivized because you like we got to go through as much damage. Start him in 10th, then you take the 20th place, start him in 11th. If you're not going to keep it, but I agree with you in the fact of go back to make the sprint meaningful. So,
yeah,
but in this format, absolutely not.
Yeah, it's only meaningful for the top 4 cars. That's it. Where if you increase the points, maybe it matters more, right? Like instead of doing 8 points for the first place, 1 point for 8th, like you increase the points significantly, then people are going to give a fuck about the sprint race. Teams are going to give a shit. Pat, thumbs up or thumbs down for a sprint race?
Hard thumbs down. The sprint races are just a dumb fucking idea, in my opinion. Like you guys just said, they just doesn't feel like it has any kind of weight or merit to it. I don't know if I would feel better if they had more points to them, or maybe, if we were doing them and, it wasn't such a dominant season. So, other cars could get valuable 4 or 5 points here and there. I don't know. I just don't like it because it's like a pre-race to the race, but we don't need that. Like, why not just make the actual race longer or something?
It's the equivalent of seeing previews for a movie, but it ends up being every good part in the movie were the previews. So you've already seen.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. I mean, it's like, okay, let's go play, a soccer match for 45 minutes. All right, well, we're going to take a day break and then we're going to come and play like an actual full game at the same score, different score. We're just going to randomize the score. We don't know what we're even going to do with it. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah. Now that all 3 of us have given our thumbs down to sprint races, we've offered some suggestions. What could be different? Some were good suggestions. Some were bad ones. But it is what it is. Formula One is an interesting sport because there's so many different perspectives on which way it can go. It's theater. It's not just sport, right? Like it's the antics behind it. And I get that, but they need to seriously consider moving back to how it was last year or just making some kind of changes because 1, it's not economically viable. They want to be net zero by whenever. That shit ain't happening when you're adding another mini race to this shit. There's just a whole lot of issues going on. Moving from the sprint race, who, of course, Max Verstappen won that. Lando Norris got second, and then Checo got third place in the sprint race. Yippee-ki-yay, motherfuckers. I mean, it was boring. Literally, I don't know about you. I zoned out more during the sprint race than I did for that actual Grand Prix, but that was just me. Moving into the race part of the race weekend here in Brazil, you had an accident on the formation lap. Chandler, the formation lap, everyone's on the grid with all their pit boxes and reporters. You have the grid walk and all this shit. And then the lights come on for the formation lap. Formation lap is one lap from their starting spots all the way around the track into their spots again. And then lights come on, boom, they go out. I'm not going to make you do the sound. Lights go out, and then the race starts. During this formation lap, you had Charles Leclerc, who, I mean, this guy has got to be the most unlucky driver this season. Explain a little bit about what went on during his formation lap.
Yeah, so while you're in the formation lap, if you haven't paid attention to that part, is drivers are trying to warm the tires, get everything kind of ready to go. That's why they do it. They don't just look, because literally if you look at it, they roll the cars out on like dollies and then lay them on the ground. So to be able to kind of get the cars up warm, because you think we have a lot of wrecks now. If you just said, all right, you're starting cold, whew, I couldn't have, that'd be carnage. So anyhow, drivers are moving back and forth across the track. There is enough of a gap so that they can kind of speed up, slow down. That's kind of the unwritten rule of a formation lap. Well, anyhow, taking turn number 7, a fairly fast turn. It's not a slow corner by any means. Chucky Boy just was kind of turning the wheels and then making the turn and actually looking at the camera looking right back at him. You just see all of a sudden it's almost a split second, like something breaks and it just boom. And next thing you know, he goes spinning, hitting the wall, and immediately radios a couple of profanities and to say, I lost the hydraulics. I've got no hydraulics. And thankfully,
he continued by saying, why am I so unlucky?
Yes. Why am I so unlucky?
When he said that, like, you just imagine one tear rolling down his face.
Yeah, well, you didn't have to imagine it whenever they interviewed him. I don't know, because if you go on the F1 YouTube, they have every driver's reaction to the race they interview. Whenever they interviewed him, he was dead inside. He was a broken man. He literally said, I don't know what I can say about this season at this point. Like, he just is at a loss for words, Chucky Boy. And it just, thankfully for the rest of the race and not to slow down the race, is that he actually happened to go off right there at a like escape road. So we didn't have to worry about taking another formation lap. Cars filled in which then the meme was the Lord of the Rings, I'm going on an adventure, because as we talked about earlier of like drivers having to walk so far. But again, Chucky Boy dead in the water before he even starts. Some are spinning it as a counterpoint of saying that Charles he would be damned if he was going to let Ferrari strategists mess up his race.
Well, so, fair enough. That's a good point. I mean,
that's the counter spin right now. So
yeah, that's the most Ferrari spin I've ever heard. But it unfortunately wasn't the only thing that happened at the start of the race. Pat, lap 1, formation lap is over. Now we have one driver retired at this point, Charles Leclerc. The lights go out and into the first corner and the second corner, carnage explodes. So basically you had 2 Haas's and a Williams fighting for room where there's only 2, fighting for a space where there's only room for 2 cars. So explain a little bit about what went on with that. Do I have balloons on my screen? Did you see that?
Sure do.
Yeah.
I guess
what the fuck?
You're celebrating the Battle of Mid. Like,
what the fuck even was that?
There's your intro. Like,
yeah. Okay, well, fucking.
Do I have balloons?
Okay, well, explain a little bit about. Fuck me, just talk. I don't know.
Okay. Um, so immediately after the lights go out, Alex Albon gets a very good start behind the two Haas cars. Um, because the Haas is so much slower, Alex tries to dart around to his right side, but he can't go any further because there's quite literally a wall. And what ends up happening is because he brakes slightly later than the Haas next to him, their wheels catch and he takes out the first Haas. And then because of the wheels catching, his car jolts forward into the second Haas, takes that one out. And then that one goes flying forward into the back of Oscar Piastri. So another one of my picks can't make it through turn one, which is great. And then you also have tires flying everywhere somehow. And those hit Daniel Ricciardo's car, despite him doing his best dodge and spin moves. And yeah, it was a pretty big shit show, to say the least. And immediately after, you get a safety car. Now, the thing about what goes on next is pretty weird. So safety car comes out because Oscar realizes his rear wing or something major is broken, and Danny also has major damage. They both come into the pits. Now, while the rest of the field is going around behind the safety car, the session gets red flagged, which don't know why they didn't just immediately red flag it anyways.
Yeah. There was like I said, there was carnage everywhere. The wall was fucked up. You had cars and debris everywhere.
There was a literal tire that made it 2.5 more turns than Charles Leclerc did on the.
That's
it was very
that one hurts.
Chaotic to say the least. It was a very chaotic sequence of events. Like it was like some Final Destination type shit. Thank God nobody died. Safety cars going around the track with the rest of the cars. And because Oscar and Danny had picked up their damage, both their teams are saying, okay, we need to go ahead and retire the car if the race is going to continue. Well, almost immediately after that decision, the race gets red flagged. And so Oscar and Danny both come into the pits because the race is red flagged. The mechanics basically get on their A game. I think, Kyle, did you see anything other than like the rear wing was broken for Oscar? That was the major thing I'd heard on TV.
So for Daniel Ricciardo, it was only his rear wing. For Oscar Piastri, however, I heard that he had floor damage as well, which is insane to me that, he gets rear-ended at such a weird angle that it hit the back of his wing. Okay, makes sense. It's the back of your car. But the floor is so crazy in the McLaren now with all these upgrades that they've done and stuff that even getting rear-ended fucks up the floor because the floor extends that high up. It was insane to me, but it was even crazier that these teams were able to not just repair their rear wings, but that especially McLaren was able to fix and replace the floor as well. So they did this all within 20 minutes of the red flag happening. So they replaced the floor and rear wing and other components in less than 20 minutes. I mean, Pat, you're the only one wearing a hat right now. So if you could do the hats off to them. Oh, someone's getting hat fished. That's fucked up.
Good enough.
Nah, but seriously, it was amazing to see that because at this point in the race, like with this red flag, the race just started. Okay, Chuck's out of the shit. He didn't even start it. Whatever. No one gives a fuck. It's a Ferrari. But after all these cars, like we seriously thought Oscar Piastri retired. We thought K-Mag was retired. We thought Albon and Ricciardo all retired. So at this point, you have 5 cars retired from the race. A quarter of the field is gone. And then, okay, 2 cars are coming back. Let's hop into Pat's paddock real quick right before we restart this race. So, Pat, take it away.
Okay. So, like we just talked about, during the safety car, Oscar and Danny came into the pits. The other Haas, I don't remember if it was Hulkenberg or Magnussen that survived that ordeal, had stayed out, basically stayed in formation. Now, because they red flagged the race, when they restarted, both Oscar and Daniel Ricciardo were set to be a lap down for everybody, which, as you would think, you're like, well, what the hell? They can't, unlap themselves or go out first and unlap themselves or anything like that. And the reason for that is some very weird technical jargon in the FIA regulations. So in Article 58-4, it states that after the 2-minute point, any cars between the safety car and the leader, in addition to any cars that had been lapped by the leader at the time the session was suspended, will be allowed to leave the pit lane and complete a further lap without overtaking, enter the pit lane, and then join the line of cars behind the safety car. So what this means is, because it states that at the time the session was suspended, because at that time Oscar and Danny were just in the pits, they hadn't been lapped yet, and then it gets red flagged. It's so dumb. But when all the other cars come back into the pits for the red flag, then they are lapped. And so because of that, instead of getting to go out and go back around and, be on the same lap as everybody, they basically got screwed. And they were starting the whole race a lap down again.
Which at that point is useless. I mean, the only reason why they went out is to get data for their co-drivers, right? So, Daniel Ricciardo went out there for Yuki, and then Oscar went out there for Lando, to give them data on, the medium tire or hard, whatever tire compound they wanted to test. They used their cars to test it. Unfortunately, though, this was not the only incident that happened. So moving on throughout the rest of the race, I mean, we hit that sweet spot where it's prime, if you got ADHD to go do 100 different things and then you come back to the end. Well, from the middle section of this race, from lap, 6 onwards, nothing really happened. You did have, however, Chandler, Ferrari, which I say Ferrari because it's the Ferrari power unit, fucked up not once with Charles Leclerc, not twice, but 3 times. So we saw the last 2 times with the Alfa Romeos. So Alfa Romeo gets their power units from Ferrari. They had a double DNF this race because on lap 23, Joe Granu, he retired. And then on lap 40, you had Bottas retire, both with the same engine issues. Now, I don't know about you, but this is maybe given like hints at what's going to happen to Red Bull when they partner with Ford. Crazy.
Yeah, we see a double DNF because Ferrari's engines just weren't good in the Alfa Romeo. A couple of different kind of things that branch off in my mind. One of the main things is that in years past, we have seen by this point in the season multiple people putting new engine parts and taking race penalties. I don't think we've seen maybe
a couple. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just kind of shocking to me that is the reliability as a whole across the 5 engine suppliers, is it up? I really don't know, but anyhow, we start to finally see, okay, this time, not this time last year, but at the Austrian Grand Prix last year, Haas, who also receives engines from Ferrari, scared to death after Carlos Sainz's engine blows up and catches on fire. Both the Haas's were like, we're scared to death about finishing this race because it might blow up at any moment. So Ferrari, again, is the first engine to show some consistent failures. Not really a surprise, but I think we're getting to that point in the season where we see that. And so it's unfortunate for Alfa Romeo because, it's their last go round and as title sponsor, just be the Sauber team next year. I have a feeling Alfa Romeo is kind of happy to be on their way out because really not a whole lot of positive to it right now. Maybe
I can't imagine the ROI is that great compared to like Aston Martin.
Especially if you bring in like Joe Guanyu, pretty good in his first year. Just kind of forgotten about this year. And Valtteri, if Valtteri doesn't have his Instagram pictures that just go wild from like the man's just living his best life, kind of forget about him too, So anyhow, that's really kind of the thing about it is I hate to say it, but nobody mentions Alfa Romeo if they don't have both a double DNF. So
Well, I mean, to give them solace, towards the end of the race, they were not the only cars to retire due to engine issues. So you had 3 Ferrari engines retire, one with Charles and then 2 with Alfa Romeo. Well, lap 58, George Russell retires, driving the Mercedes with the Mercedes power unit, obviously.
Joining the club, Pat.
So this point in the race, I knew I was set. As long as nothing happened to Lewis Hamilton, I knew I was good for the picks. We'll get into that later, but I just needed shit to just go smoothly the rest of the race. We're almost there. There's 71, 74 laps or some shit like that.
Laps. I think it's the second shortest track on circuit. So,
in the 70s, and we're almost there. So I just needed him to hold out just a little bit longer. Well, to end the race, though, we had some of the best racing of the year. I mean, to see what Fernando Alonso and Sergio Perez did, it was like watching, Remember the Titans for the first time or something. Like, it was literally magical watching that shit.
For all these people that have watched, and I've talked about multiple times this year how Interlagos is my favorite, I was very scared that it was going to be very underwhelming after the sprint race in this. Interlagos racing is Fernando Alonso and Checo Perez on that last lap. That is why I love Interlagos.
Pat, it really gave like 2021 F1 season like vibes with the amount of like close racing, except the only difference was, in my opinion, that these two drivers are such great defenders and they're so respectful. Barring Sergio Perez the last 6 races where he's just not himself anymore, but before this season, you take Checo, like prime Checo and prime Fernando, you threw them, a little bit of like touch of gray, like men's touch of gray, stick them in their cars, and then you get this race this past weekend. It was fucking amazing to watch.
Yeah, it was a very epic, like 3-lap battle. Both of them are known, like we said, for their defense. And both of them were actually going for very, very risky last minute dives, coming down the straights and basically just throwing it all on the line to get on the podium, which, as we've said in the last 6-10 weeks, I don't know how long it's been since Checo stopped sucking. He turned back the clock a little for us. Same thing with Fernando, and it's highly entertaining, to the point where it was quite literally one of the very few photo finishes that you'll see in F1 in the past, 10 years. I think they were like 5 thousandths of a second apart or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy.
53 thousandths of a second.
Yeah, I mean it's basically
you can't even fathom
distance,
that. Yeah,
it's the distance from the nose to the wheels. Like that's how close it was. Which, Fernando Alonso was in a similar battle with Sebastian Vettel at the Japanese Grand Prix last year. And it's always just an epic thing to watch, no matter what place they're competing for.
You could tell that they were having so much fun too. Like after the race was over, and Chandler talked a little bit, like every driver does their reactions to the race, in the media pen. Well, Checo came over to Alonso while he was in the middle of an interview and hugged him and basically was like, I had so much fun. And Fernando said into the mic, I told him, don't do that again. I'm not as young as I used to be. I can't handle the stress. so like they're both having a really good time. And like, when was the last time you saw Checo like shoot the shit and have fun like that? I think it was awesome.
I've never seen him like that, to be honest. I don't think I've ever seen him that happy without winning a race.
Yeah, fair.
That start finish line is 5 meters further along that straight, and that results the other way around. Like that's how close it was.
Yeah, I mean, we had obviously Max Verstappen won by 12 and a half minutes or so. Then you had Lando Norris. He came in second place. Love it, McLaren fan. Dub. But that close battle, man, we didn't like. I don't know about you guys. For the first 2 turns on the cool down lap, like after they finished the race, I'm like, okay. Then it popped up. Fernando Alonso, 3rd place. I'm like, okay, I want to see a fucking picture. I want to see that picture right now. like
Yes.
like that shit happens like that, but eventually like they F1 came out with like the diagram of like where the GPSs were, and he's like this far. It's like it's crazy to see, but it was a nice ending to a race where the sprint wasn't very great. The entry, the beginning of the race was awesome. The middle was pretty uneventful, but then you had the ending like that. It ended it a perfect race weekend. Um, so I mentioned Lando finished second. Well, he also got driver of the day again. I think that's his third or fourth time in a row or some shit like that.
That's
So
right.
you're not getting those unless you're making moves, and I'd love to see it. But in my opinion, I think Fernando Alonso should have won it
Yeah,
instead.
I think he won driver of the day off the start, going from
Yeah,
second, because not really like once he got second, he really didn't relinquish it. Other than I think he had the lead for a hair before Max pitted, or right after Max pitted, and then like somebody said for like the first time in X amount of laps, Max had someone within DRS of him. Like, but he won it off of that. Now, had that not really, because also I will say this too, that the driver of the day voting closes at the start of the last lap. If it goes until the end of the race, I don't think Lando wins that. So,
okay.
but
I
still,
mean that. Yeah,
good
that's
for
a fair
him.
point.
Good for him. I mean, obviously, it doesn't really mean much in the grand scheme of things, but
Yeah, yeah. It's just bragging rights at that point. But I mean, if we're going to talk about bragging rights, let's talk about these picks, boys. So last Grand Prix, I got the dub for picking the U.S. Grand Prix. We moved to last episode where I had to pick this race weekend. So for the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, I picked Lewis Hamilton. Following that, Pat, you picked Oscar. Chandler, you picked George Russell. So at first you had, Oscar Piastri get involved in that accident. And I thought Pat was just going to quit this podcast forever. Luckily, they fixed his car. That's great. Oh, but he's a lap down, so he really can't do shit. And then towards the end of the race, you had George Russell retire due to engine issues. And Chandler, I mean, I think he booked a flight just so he didn't have to talk to us on the on the group text. So
hey
Chandler
man, I
was
watched it in the Hartsfield Jackson Airport.
well. All I'm saying is that's 2 in a row, boys. I told y'all keep my wife's name out your
Bro,
mouth.
suck me.
It's too easy.
Take a
I gave
long
y'all-
I
walk.
couldn't write
ga-
this shit if I tried,
I
man.
gave
Take a
y'all
long
a
walk
heads
off
the
a short
rain,
pier.
the rain on quality day, giving Oscar one lap, and then he bins it, and then doesn't make it past turn one because he gets rear-ended. Call in Brad Pitt. We're finishing the movie right here.
All I'm saying is, I told y'all a couple weekends ago that I was giving you guys a head start.
Yeah.
Your head start's over, boys. We're going for 3 in a row because the next race is the one that everybody's been talking about for fucking years, whether it's good or bad.
I was about to say a lot more bad lately, but they are still talking about it.
That's neither here nor there. They're talking about it. Is the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Now, this is a regular race weekend with only the practice, qualifying, and race sessions. There's no sprint race. But the shitty thing is that all 3 of us are on the Eastern time. Well, qualifying is going to be November 18th at 3 a.m. Yeah, good fucking move, F1. The race is Sunday at 1 a.m. I mean, these fucking jamussies, dude. This is such a bad look. Like, if you're going to be that
Nothing
shitty,
excites me more than knowing that a race in my home country is at the exact same time as a race in the far east of Japan.
it's so infuriating. But I will be okay. I'm going to record the qualifying. There's no shot I'm staying up at 3 a.m. No shot.
Not.
I am going to record that. The race I'll stay at 4 because it's only 1 a.m., whatever. But I do want to get a three-peat here. I'm going for the hat trick, 3 race predictions in a row. No one's ever raced here before. Street circuit, I don't know who the right choice is. Or do I? This guy could really, really ruin my race prediction. Or he could I mean, he could surprise everybody. He could even win this shit. So I've noticed that picking a McLaren has been like your number one goal, right? Like whether it's Lando or Oscar. If you pick Lando, you're probably set. Well, for me, I'm going to go ahead and pick Sergio Perez to finish highest after Max Verstappen in the Las Vegas Grand Prix. King of the streets. We'll see what it does. Let's move from my pick into the second place pick. Pat, you picked Oscar to win this race. He ended up a lap down. So go ahead. Who's your pick for the Las Vegas Grand Prix?
Yeah, I really don't even know who I want to pick. I'm gonna go with Charles Leclerc.
Even after all those Ferrari issues?
Look,
okay.
If this guy didn't have bad luck, he'd have no luck at all. So Vegas is a city where you take risks and you gamble it all. And I'm praying to God he has some luck, because I just don't even know who to pick for this track, because all the rest of the teams are just so inconsistent with who's going to be on the podium. So you might as well be playing roulette with a bunch of drivers' faces.
That's fair enough. So I picked Checo, you picked Chucky. Chandler, you picked George Russell for this Sao Paulo Grand Prix. He didn't even finish the race. So who was your pick for the Las Vegas Grand Prix?
Well, tip of the cap, you have a very good pick, Kyle. But it is so good to know that I can pick like 5 drivers and know I'm going to beat Patrick because something's going to happen. I'm torn.
You can pick 19 drivers and still beat them.
I'm going to go with the safe route and say Lando. I kind of want to say Fernando, but I know that either one of them will beat Charles Leclerc. I just don't. I'm just going to go with the safe route, like you said. Lando, you're pretty set. So
yeah,
Fernando and Aston Martin. Who knows? Because I did find out this also. We didn't mention it. Their upgrades that made them worth dog water. They rolled them all back, and now they're the original car they started the season with. So who knows? But I'm going with Lando, knowing that I'll take second place.
Look, this is what's going to happen. Charles is going to crash out on the first turn and take out like 17 cars, and y'all's 2 cars and Max are going to be the only ones left. So just be prepared for that.
Or you're going to have like angry construction workers who are just trying to get to work in Vegas. They just throw all their tools on the track. And you just see like the Stop Oil protesters out there and shit. So who knows? It could be a whole ass like Avengers Endgame scene where you just have the locals attacking the F1 fans. You never know. But either way, stay tuned because like I said, qualifying for the Las Vegas Grand Prix is November 18th. That's Saturday at 3 a.m. Yeah, good fucking move. And then the race is Sunday, November the 19th at 1 a.m. So it's going to be a late one, boys. Going to have to stay up or go to bed early, whichever way you look at it. It's going to be a fun one, though. And can't believe I'm saying this, but go Checo.